Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mummy, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 248 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mummy, and it's landscaping day outside, and I can't meet these guys, so I got to record over them. So I apologize for that, but we're glad to have you with us, and hope everybody had a great Easter, Passover holiday weekend. We are still in the midst of bar exam results coming out around the country. I think we're up to about 17 to 20 states that have released so far. The largest of those has been the Florida exam, but last week we had Alabama, and we have some UBE states coming along now. And the next big state probably will be New York. Somewhere near the end of April, beginning of May, we'll have the New York exams. We have the Texas exam scheduled to come out. And when the New York exams come out, typically we see Illinois and some other large northeastern states as well. So we'll keep you informed as all of that happens. If this is the first time on the podcast with us, welcome. We're glad you found us. We come to you just about every week at this same time to talk about all things bar exam related. Now, we do these podcasts in both audio and video format. If you'd like to watch the podcast, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/248. That's this week's episode number. And all of the previous episodes, you can find the same just by putting in the episode number. If you'd rather listen to your podcast, you can do that on Apple iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, lots of places where podcasts are syndicated, and there's complete show notes there as well. And we also have a list of all of our podcasts going back to the very first episode on our website. Just click on the podcast tab at the top of the page for all of those episodes and the show notes. Now, today's episode is really a fun one. A couple of weeks ago, I got to do an interview with a passing February 2019 bar taker in North Carolina. That's a uniform bar exam jurisdiction. And I spoke to Abigail about her process and what happened and the circumstances. Abigail's story is really remarkable. She took the exam a couple of times unsuccessfully, then came to Celebration Bar Review, took the exam again as the UBE, the Uniform Bar Exam, and she raised her score by over 24 points to pass and become eligible for licensure in, I think it's 26 states. And it's an extraordinary story, as you're going to hear, because she had to overcome some extraordinary challenges. So stick around for that interview. I think you're going to be inspired and motivated by it, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed talking with her. Before we jump into our interview with Abigail, I want to just let you know that, as always, this episode is sponsored by our free training webinar, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. This is a 90-minute look at the 4 steps that you have to follow in order to pass the bar. And it's completely free, and it's going to be this Thursday at 7 p.m. Now, it is free, but you do have to register in advance, and you can do that by simply going to the show notes on the video or the audio page, or by going to this website, celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. Now, once you're registered and join us for this training, we're going to take you through all of the things that you have to do in order to pass the bar. It's a 4-step process that we've used successfully with thousands of people. You'll hear case studies, you'll get lots of opportunity for interaction, and I think you're going to find it incredibly valuable. So I encourage you to join us this Thursday, 7 p.m. your time, for this special training, Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. So make sure that you check that out. All right, well, I don't want to keep you waiting any longer. Our interview with Abigail was absolutely wonderful, and I think you're going to enjoy this a great deal. So let's talk to the newest member of the North Carolina Bar, Abigail C. Well, hey, everybody, welcome back to Hanging Out with Successful Bar Exam Takers, and I have a story and a person for you today that I am really, really excited to share the story and to have you meet. And welcome, everybody, to Abigail Seymour, who is a new member of the North Carolina Bar. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much.
This has been quite a journey for you, hasn't it?
It really has, yes.
Yeah. We've got a lot to unpack here today, a lot to tell people, but I want to make sure that everybody knows that the end of this story is a very, very happy tale. You passed the UBE in North Carolina in February 2019. It was not your first try on the exam, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
It was my 3rd try.
3rd try. And I guess the question sometimes that people ask me is, is it going to be worth it when I pass for everything I've been through? How would you answer that?
I described the feeling to someone the other day as if you were to take a wedding proposal, positive pregnancy test, winning a championship, winning a lottery ticket, all those amazing hilltop moments all rolled into one. That's exactly what it felt like. And it still feels like that. That's what's amazing. So I knew it would be wonderful, but I had no idea it would feel this good.
Okay, that's great. Now let's let's back up. Let's go back in the story because there were some low points for you along the way getting here. So why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in law school and what your journey has been?
Sure. Well, I came to law school later in life. Although I grew up around the law, my grandfather was a noted attorney in New York. My uncle was an attorney. My brother was an attorney. It was something I was always surrounded by. And, but I was the youngest of 5 kids, and I was very creative and artsy, and it was just not something that I felt was really my calling. I ended up going to undergraduate at NYU in art and fine arts and theater and storytelling and things like that. And when I look back on it, it's funny because my favorite class in undergrad was called Journalism and the Law. And I used to actually go down in between classes and go to take the subway downtown and go to Superior Court and watch trials. So it was always something that was really interesting to me. But I was also very adventurous and, like I said, had been very creative. And nobody had ever said, you'd make a great attorney. It was more like, you'd make a great writer or an actor or a photographer. So I sort of went in that direction. And instead of going to law school, I ended up selling everything and moving to Spain, which was a fantastic experience in and of itself. But during those years, it was almost like the ship sailed because I didn't go to law school right after college. So I lived abroad and I did writing and I did photography and I did all those wonderful creative things, but I had always been a little sad that I'd never pursued going to law school. So I had a career as a photographer for a long time. I was a journalist, but I really always wanted to go to law school. And having lived in Spain for 3 years, I spoke Spanish. And after I had done photography for a long, long time, I said, I think I'd like to work with my Spanish again. So I started working with a nonprofit and, of course, ended up working with the immigration attorney and said to her sort of as a secret, well, actually, I've always secretly wanted to be an attorney. And she was like, oh, you have to do that. And I was like, well, I'm not young anymore. That's over. She's like, well, it doesn't matter. You have to do this. And then she sort of outed me, and the whole nonprofit was like, oh, yeah, you're going to law school. So it didn't obviously take much pushing because I was like, well, okay, if you guys think I should do this. So I applied to law school in 2014 and I got in and went to school, but I was, I think, the second oldest person in my class, which I always had sort of a chip on my shoulder about. But I loved law school. It was a wonderful experience and I felt like I was absolutely in the right place.
Okay. So you graduate law school in 2017, right?
2017. I had, at the time, 2 small children, a 3rd grader and a 2nd grader. And maybe another part that I hadn't even told you is that during my first year of law school, my sister, who was my best friend, she was very ill with bipolar. And the first day of my 2nd semester, she died by suicide. So it was just an awful, dark moment. And everybody was like, are you going to quit school? And everybody was so supportive and so wonderful. But it was a really tough thing to bear for our whole family. And it was really tough. But I wouldn't dream of having left school because it was my happy place. I remember somebody was like, law school is your happy place? Like they thought that was really strange. But it was a salvation for me to get lost in the stories and in my own journey forward. So, and I knew my sister would want me to keep doing this. And so, so that was part of it. So yes, but I did go ahead and finish in a normal amount of time. I didn't take any time off. And I graduated in May of 2017.
Okay. And then you sat for what was then the North Carolina bar, not the uniform bar exam, because they switched in 2019. So you sat for the regular North Carolina bar, and you studied the way I assume most law students do. You went to one of the big box bar review courses and you sat in the classroom. Right.
I remember laughing my first year because they sort of, it was like gateway, like they signed us up with all this free stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. And somehow I was committed to this huge, expensive program, but it was very well known. And I thought, okay, well, it's been around a long time. But I have to be honest, as slick and good as that program is, it never felt right for me personally. I know a lot of people have succeeded with it, but I just felt already pressure, knowing that I had to jam in my studies into, I guess, 10 weeks and had so many other things going on. And so I had signed up with a big box bar review and sort of tried to clear the decks to study for the July bar.
Okay. And you didn't pass in July of that first year. So now the feeling is pretty awful, obviously. What's your plan at that point? You've got 2 small children. You've just finished these 3 years of schooling. You obviously have a successful career outside the law. Did you think, maybe I should just walk away from this?
Well, and to make it even more crazy and dramatic, I received my letter in August of that year, at the end of August. And I remember I was opening my letter, but I was clutching an ice pack to my side because that very day I had gone in to get a needle biopsy because I had felt a lump. And I thought, oh, it's nothing. Everybody's like, oh, it's nothing. Spoiler alert, it was not nothing. The day after I found out I had failed the North Carolina bar, I went to my doctor and he said, you have breast cancer. And it was absolutely devastating. And oddly, because it was so devastating, the bar failure rather, seemed almost dumb. I mean, I was just like, who cares? It was so painful, but this was even worse. Yeah. And it was a very terrifying experience. And so in many ways, I kind of buried the grief that I felt about the bar because I really didn't know what was going to happen. I wasn't able to tell my children for another week till I could find out what was going on. Long story short, I had stage 2 breast cancer. I had a mastectomy in October of that year, which was, I think my surgery was actually the day that I was supposed to have had to sign up for the February bar. And I was trying to decide what to do. And people were like, don't take the bar. Like, you got to take care of yourself. But I still felt like I got to do this. I didn't take it that February. I took the year off to recover. I did not need chemo or radiation. My health is good now. I take a long-term drug to stave it off, but it's still part of my life, but I was extremely fortunate. But there was a point where then I was really ready to grieve not passing the bar. And I remember the moment where I was like, it's time to really be sad about that because it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. Sometimes when people get their results back, I think we flippantly say, well, it's not the end of the world. It's not cancer. It's not. But in your case, you got both within 24 hours of each other. And I think that a lot of people at that point would have simply given up, maybe given up in their health, certainly given up on the bar exam and said, it doesn't matter and it's not important and gone away. But obviously there was something deeper for you about the law and about passing the bar, because when that year had gone on, then you decided to re-enroll and take the bar again in the next July. And again, you used a big box bar review, but you modified it a little bit, right?
I did. You're right. I used another sort of again, I felt like that wasn't right for me, but I hadn't yet discovered your program. And I will say that was partly because you did UBE, but not North Carolina. So it was not something that was on my radar. It was not a state that you were teaching to. So I hadn't discovered you, and I basically sort of cobbled together my own program, which I don't recommend. But I put in a lot of hours, and I made the flashcards, and I did lots of study questions, and I was doing, what you're supposed to do. And I sat for the July 2018 bar. And I felt better, but then I came out of there and I said, no, I'm never doing that. I'm not going to put myself through that anymore. I said, my body can't take it. Like, sort of what you're saying, I thought this is not worth my health. Like, this stress of this is too much. And I said, I think I dropped 15 points. I'm not doing this again. And I got my letter saying, sorry. And I didn't even care. I was like, yeah, I know I didn't pass. And I wrote a way to get my score. And to my shock, I had actually raised my score by 14 points and I was only off by a few. And it was like, oh, well, that's a horse of a different color. It just changed my whole perspective because I thought, well, first of all, I'm completely wrong. My instinct was that I had done worse and I hadn't. it re-energized me. And I just thought, I'm close enough to this darn thing. I've gone through, I was willing to try again.
Yeah, but of course the exam now is going to switch formats. So now you go from a state-specific test to the uniform bar exam, given in about 35 states at this point. And it's made up of generic, non-state specific essays, performance tests, and then the multi-state bar exam, a different grading scale, a different formatting of the questions on the essays, a different weighting between the written portion and the MBE. So all of that is new and different. Plus, you're, as I recall the story, you're still trying to deal with the after effects of the medicine that you're taking for breast cancer, which I know from experience of my own family members can be devastatingly difficult to deal with. And now you've got a little bit of hope, right? It's like, okay, I can see my way forward on this. And you reached out to me and you wrote me a really passionate, very memorable email in which you sort of laid out your story for me, along with a few other things we haven't talked about yet, and basically said, so, what do you think? I got a shot or not? And my thought was, well, as close as you came in North Carolina and the determination, and anybody that's willing to fight their way through breast cancer and survive that and still want to take the bar exam, heck yeah. And so I said, come into the course. I mean, absolutely, we want you here. And you signed up initially for what we call our basic coaching program, which meant I wasn't working with you individually, although later we did some work together. But you were part of the course. You had all the materials. You had the Facebook group. You had group coaching, all of those pieces, right? Am I getting that story correct?
Right. Well, and what's important is from my perspective is that I realized my MBE score was kind of stuck. And I felt like my essays were pretty strong, even though they were about to shift. So I basically Googled how to raise my MBE score. And I stumbled upon one of these videos. And I think it was Amanda's, Miljenovic. I always get her name wrong.
Miljenovic, yeah. She's one of our group coaches, right?
She was an Elon grad and had also done the North Carolina bar, and she became my bar coach. But I saw her video and I just was like, this is for me. There was just something about it. I was like, if this woman, she had taken the bar 9 times. It's a great video if you haven't seen it. And I was like, this is for me. And I just knew somehow that it was right. So yes, I signed up for the basic and I started. One of the things that you talked about that helped me a lot was that everybody's got to put in 250 to 300 hours. But depending on your life, you've got to start at a different time. And that was the one thing I hadn't heard from anyone else. Was I thought, I can't jam 300 hours into 10 weeks. It's just not the way my life is. So you said, you should be starting 4 to 6 months in advance. And sure enough, I started in October to study for February. And I recommend that to everyone because it was extremely helpful to me.
Now, you also used PhotoReading, didn't you?
I did.
Well, let's talk about PhotoReading because that often comes up for people and they say, what is that thing?
Same thing. I was sort of like, I don't know, I don't know how electricity works. I just know that it works. And so I don't have to understand things in order to implement them into my life. And I believed what everybody said. And I said, I'm going to do this. And one of the things I used to would get stuck on was reading outlines. I'd fall asleep. I'd get bored. I'd get frustrated. I'd get lost. I'd think about other things. And so I was willing to try PhotoReading because it has a completely different approach to the material.
Right. And so you were able to read your outlines in 15 minutes instead of hours and hours. Can you give our audience a kind of a guesstimate as to how many times you might have read a particular subject outline?
25, 30,
yeah,
probably more. And what I like about it, and it's a term that comes from property law, is that things that touch and concern the law or touch and concern the land. And in this way, I felt like PhotoReading allowed me to touch the outline over and over and over again in different ways. And I listened to a podcast about it that you had published that helped me understand. You start by PhotoReading the whole thing, and then you dip back in and expand different parts of it as you're interested in it or as it speaks to you. And that just made so much sense to me. So I started building mind maps and creating different ways of interacting with the material, which was just a huge, I think when I did it the first time, I think you read the outline once, listen to one lecture, and then you're done. And that just didn't work for me. obviously.
Yeah. So mind maps are this great tool of being able to create a visual representation. And of course, as a creative person, I think for you, I got the feeling you really enjoyed doing the mind maps. Is that accurate?
Oh, I did. I loved it. I'm really into, colored pencils and journals and paper and all that kind of stuff. So it really did speak to that tactile part of my brain and the visual, being a visual learner. So yes, it was perfect for me. It kept it from feeling like it was very two-dimensional and dry. It was alive, and that made it much more fun to interact with.
Right. So now you're studying, getting ready for the February exam. And like a lot of bar takers, as we get closer to the exam, you hit kind of a proverbial wall. But in your case, you identified something that was very interesting. You sent me an email and you said, okay, wait a minute. You're using way too much language that sounds like you might be a friend of Bill W.'s. And I wrote back and said, well, no, not actually. My father, it was a fairly famous alcohol therapist, rehabilitation therapist. And so I grew up in that world. And so I tended to use a lot of that language. And the specific language that I talked about was a dry drunk. You remember that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to talk a little bit about what your dry drunk felt like at that point for you?
Well, I should say that the reason it resonated for me, and I think this is why the whole program just felt so real to me, it's a whole person approach. And so the part that was missing for me up until I found you was the sense that there were real people taking this exam, and I didn't feel like I had any support. Nobody that I knew had taken it twice. Everybody I knew had moved on. And so finding this network of people and support just felt so familiar to me, because I've been coming to 12-step meetings for almost 23 years now. So I've been sober since 1996.
Congratulations.
And I've gone, thank you. And I've gone to Al-Anon and AA. And so is very familiar to me. And therefore the language you were using was familiar. It was the dry drunk, but it was also fake it till you make it. There were just all these things I was like, sounds really familiar. So for me, the dry drunk, I just laughed because I was beginning to get really snippy and annoyed and tense and crying all the time. It was exactly what you had described. And every time you were describing, here's where you all probably are in your process before the bar, I was like, oh yeah, you called it right on there. So it was very, it rang my bell.
Yeah, and you don't have to be a recovering alcoholic to have a dry drunk. The behavior really is that suddenly you're starting to act irrationally based on the reality of the world. Your barista doesn't hate you. Your children, don't hate you as much, any more than they normally do. The world is not out to get you. It's just the stress of the bar exam is enormous, and a high stakes test brings out, for some people, the very worst in their personalities, and then they become sort of these irrational, crazy people. And when the stress is past, then they look around and say, why is everyone cowering in the corner? It's as though, they've had an out-of-body experience. And you got very frightened near the end. And so at that point, you scheduled some one-on-one personal coaching time with me. What was that like? I mean, because you've been in the basic course, you'd had my expertise in the lectures, you've been working with Amanda in the group coaching, you've been in Facebook, but nobody had actually looked at your work and talked to you directly about your work. So what was that process like?
I feel like that was the most valuable piece, honestly, because, and if I had to do it again, which I'm glad I don't, I was going to go for the full Monty, so to speak. I would, because your looking at my work was extremely helpful to me. We had very little time because I bought 2 half-hour sessions. One we did essays and one we just kind of talked about the overall exam. But you were like, your essays, you got some work to do here. You were pretty clear. You're like, you're not going to get there. You got some work to do. And I knew that. So it wasn't telling me something that I didn't know, but hearing it, it gave me the inspiration that I needed to get over the hump, so to speak. But you also really helped me with the part that I think was the most blocking for me. And I think this is true for a lot of retakers. We talked about this. It was even I know it was another lesson that you had done, but basically that if you give everything you've got to something and you still fail, what does that say about you as a person? And the fear of that is what stops us. Because I personally can say that maybe I was holding back. Maybe I was finding drama. Maybe I wasn't creating drama with breast cancer, but busyness and distractions and other people's problems and stuff, it can easily be the reason they say, well, of course I didn't pass because I had all these other things going on. And people would say that to me. They'd be like, well, of course you had so much going on, but I didn't want that to be the reason, So pushing through that was really important for me. To say, you said, I don't care what happens at that exam. I want you to leave everything on the table. And that was an incredibly important piece of advice for me, because having been an athlete as a young person, I approached the exam the first 2 times. And this was key. I hope this helps somebody else. But I thought for any big event, you got to get jacked up. You got to get excited. You got to listen to, jock jams, whatever, get excited. And so I would get all juiced up. I remember listening to Cardi B on the way over to the July exam, because I was like, I gotta get all psyched up. I didn't pass. Not that I don't love Cardi B, but that was not the right mode for this. This is a somber event. This is an event to draw on deep, deep wells that I'd never really drawn upon before. So it was a whole different approach. So that was a big moment for me. And that was what you lead up to for all of us. You've got a lot of podcasts about it, lots of meditations and preparation for the exam day. It was completely different from what I thought I'd had to do before.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Your daughters, right? You have 2 daughters?
I have a daughter and a son. Mm-hmm.
Daughter and a son. Okay. What was their reaction to you studying for the bar for the 3rd time? What did they think about this process?
Well, my daughter was, my son lives with his dad, so he was over here some, and but also very supportive. He'd be like, "Hey, Mom, are you gonna finally pass that bar?" But my daughter sacrificed a lot, especially near the end. She'd be like, I'd like to have friends sleep over. And I was like, I can't have kids in the house. I can't, you guys gotta, there was a lot of giving up that she had to do. But she said later that I think that it's inspired her to fight through things, I hope. I mean, she hasn't really articulated that, but I think it's made her a little tougher. But she had to put up with a lot. She really did.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that, because I think often we forget that we don't do this process in isolation. There are other people in our world, and they're watching, and certainly your children are watching, and they want to know, how do I deal with a test? How do I deal with high stakes? How do I deal with adversity? Your story is remarkable on so many levels, the adversity that you've overcome. And I would think that even if your kids may not, they're pretty young still, they may not fully appreciate it. In a few years, they're going to look back and go, holy cow, you realize what Mom did? And that's got to be an extraordinary feeling for you as a mom. But I think it's one of those things that you kind of, and I remember we talked a little bit before the exam about the fact that you were setting expectations for your family. You were, letting them see how to model through these difficult things, just as you had to model through, the other challenges in your life. And what an incredible picture that is for them. So now with all of that going on, and all of the preparation and the study, and you're ready, now you go back to take the new form UBE in North Carolina. What was it like to go back into the exam for the 3rd time?
It really was different. I was much calmer. I followed every bit of directions. One of the things I really appreciated was you all send out an email the night before, the morning of, the night of this. Here's what you guys need to do today. It was not only encouraging, but it was also very specific, because at that point I was in danger of sort of spinning off into craziness, and I didn't want to go there. And you, at the very beginning of the program, said, you guys got to exercise, you got to take care of yourselves. And so knowing that that was a priority, I stayed in a hotel. I brought my yoga mat. I brought earphones that I could do paraliminals. I stayed very quiet. And one of my favorite things is that you recommend that we dress for the bar. And some people don't like that, but I like dressing up anyway. But it's not about dressing up. It's about being a professional. And that felt right to me. So I brought a suit, and I brought, very simple, comfortable suit. But I just thought that's a really smart idea, because what you had said was you guys are telling the universe that you're ready. You're not going into a little torts exam. This is the rest of your life. And from this day forward, this is your career. And that just gave me goosebumps. And I was like, that's going to be right for me. And I remember I got to the exam and this woman said, dressed for success. Some proctor was, and I was like, oh, that made me happy. So, but going in, I just felt centered. I was careful not to sort of dispel my energy, because with nervous chatter and, I would often do that. Just like, I just stayed really quiet. I wasn't unfriendly, but I kept it very quiet. And the only thing that threw me off was I was convinced that the morning was going to be essays and afternoon was going to be performance tests. And it was the opposite. So I was like, oh, what is this? But it wasn't a big deal. But just the experience itself was not as unpleasant. It really wasn't. I was ready. And one of the things I remember you saying is, this is not a test, it's an assessment. Go in there and show them what you know. And that felt so different to me than feeling like they were against me and the examiners. There's this kind of anger and resentment that you can begin to fall into after failure, because you want to blame somebody other than yourself. And I didn't have that attitude. I was like, our lawyers should know this stuff. And I want to be fluent in this. And I want to be able to show that I do know this stuff. And what was amazing was I really did. And
I think this is one of the values of photo reading and mind mapping paraliminals, is that as you come across the questions, you have an intuitive sense of the answer. Am I correct?
It is. And I remember listening to people's videos and thinking, what? I don't understand. But it really was like, as I've said before, I speak Spanish, so it's a language, and I just knew what the next sentence was going to be. It wasn't, I don't mean it to sound like I was being spoken to. It wasn't that. It's just that when you know something, it comes out in fluent terms, in fluent sentences. And so I just knew what to say. And
on the MBE, when you were reading the questions, did you have the same sort of experience of, I know what the answer is going to be?
I did. That was where I struggled with trusting your method. The morning session, I held back a little bit more, and I had to struggle near the end. And the second session, I was like, I'm just going to do what Jackson taught me how to do. And I got done early, which was amazing. So yes, but it was the same thing. I did exactly what I had to do. A couple of little things, like I had to, I learned to underline each question, just because I also have ADHD. So it was like, I would realize I was having a hard time. I was reading sentences too many times. So I just was willing to find ways to make it work for me. And once I did that, I could stay quiet and I could hear the sentences, and then I could hear the answers, which was amazing.
And we call that process selective intuition. And that's exactly what we're looking for, is that you could finish in under 3 hours for 100 questions. Well, so the exam finishes, and then you've got the interminable wait for results. What's your thought as you're in that period, that season of waiting for the results?
Well, and I realized I was very lucky, because I think our state was actually one of the first ones to release results.
It is. It is.
I have friends that still haven't gotten their results yet, so fingers crossed. But I'm very fortunate, because in October, right around the time I started studying, I took a job as a brief writer in the immigration department for a wonderful law firm in town called Dummett Fraden, and they just embraced me. And I was working part-time and studying part-time, but I was beginning to truly write very much like performance tests. I was writing affidavits and not affidavits, briefs for the court, etc. So it was easy to go back to work because they were very supportive, but at the same time, they were so supportive that they were basically like, well, when you get your license and when you start, and having been through it twice, I was like, let's not count our chickens yet. It was a little nerve-wracking for me, even though they were like, oh, we're sure you're going to pass. But it helped distract me, because I stayed really busy. But I started to get a little bit weird near the end. I was very anxious. I signed up for this thing called informed delivery, because our results come in the mail. I did not know this exists, but you can get the post office to send you a scan of every piece of mail that's coming into your mailbox that day. So I'd be able to tell my family, there's nothing in the mail today, because we were waiting for like a week and a half. And finally I called the bar, and they were like, well, results went out today. And I was like, oh my gosh. But each day I would look at the scan. And so finally on a Saturday. And the rumors started going around, oh, people in Winston-Salem have gotten their record, So then I thought, well, maybe they sent all the passing scores first and they haven't sent mine yet. I was just in craziness. So Saturday at 7:30 in the morning, I saw that the letter was coming. And the mail doesn't come till 4:00 in the afternoon. So I just had to stay really busy and wait for that letter. So I did, and I finally saw the mail truck down the street. And my best friend, I texted him and I said, the mail truck is coming. So he ran over, and he's so funny, come on, he said, I took the red lights as suggestions. So he came racing over to the house, and we sat on the porch, and finally he said, I can't wait anymore. So he went over to this nice mailman who's wandering down the street and basically got the letter off of him and brought it over to me.
And then you opened the letter.
I opened the letter.
Your friend took a picture.
My friend took a picture. I was also FaceTiming with my friend Meg. So there was just all this excitement, but I also, I've seen the letter, and I knew my two paths. I had already written down the deadline for signing up for July. I was going to just I knew what I had to do. I was just going to start again. I was ready. But I opened the letter, I still have here, and it had all I saw was the word happy, because it said, we're happy to inform you. And once I saw the word happy, I just went crazy. And then I actually did read the whole thing to make sure I had read it correctly. But it was amazing. And he was crying, and she was crying, and I was crying. And it was just hysterical. So it was incredible feeling. Absolutely the best.
And that's the picture we're probably going to use for this interview. So just so you know, folks, that's where that picture came from. Do you want to share with us what your scores were?
The passing score for North Carolina is 270. And I looked it up. That means that I'm able to practice in 26 jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. Most importantly, New York and DC. Mm-hmm. I got a 272. And that's fine. But I raised my score from the last time I took it by 11 points.
That's huge.
Which is huge. A lot of it came on the essay side. My MBEs went up. I think my MBEs went up 4 points. I was, of course, wanting even more, but I remember you telling a story about somebody who called you up and was like, I passed, but I didn't get the score I wanted. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm a jerk. But of course, then I was like, oh, I wish I'd gotten even more, because I wanted to be able to, whatever. It doesn't matter. I could care less. I'm so thrilled. So I can now practice in any of
a lot of places. 26 states, and there's some big ones there: New York, Illinois, Massachusetts. You got a bunch. So that's got to be an extraordinary feeling. What did your kids say when they found out?
My daughter was at a birthday party at the skating rink, and she and all of her friends said, "Yay, congratulations." It was really cute. So they were so thrilled. And then my son, who apparently he's a big Fortnite player, he said, "Oh, good, now Mom can help me sue Xbox." And I was like, what happened with Xbox? That he's got some beef with them. But he's really proud too. And he's partly my inspiration. He's actually adopted from Guatemala, and part of my inspiration for doing immigration law has to do with his origins and his life. And I'm hoping to be able to take him back someday. And I tell him all the time that he's the reason I wanted to go into immigration law in the first place. So.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, what a story. On so many levels, what a story, Abigail. And so proud of you. I guess, to sort of wrap up, two things. One is, I would love to get any advice that you would give people as they're sort of starting the journey or looking around or thinking about it. And then before we finish up, I can't finish up without asking you to yell, I've got my life back. I think, Dave Ramsey-esque of us. But before we do that, anything that you would like to share with our audience or with people that might be watching or listening? Because I know this is going to inspire an incredible number of people. It's a terrific story. And I'm sure there's some folks sitting out there watching this going, I don't know, can I do it?
Well, I have a couple of friends who I have gone on this journey with me, and one of whom missed by 1 point. And my heart is just breaks, because I know that feeling, and it has taken all of my strength not to just grab everybody by the lapels and be like, guys, you've got to do this program, because it's not for everybody, but I think it's really good for people who have had a failure or two in anything, but really with the bar, because it is, as you said, if you've gone to law school and finished law school, you can pass this exam. It's not the material. It's not, we don't know the material. There are so many barriers that we put up for ourselves that having a way to get through it where you're not going through it by yourself, and also the method of teaching that you have, but also just the group collective support has made a huge difference for me. So I feel like people who've just been like, oh, I don't know if I want to do this, it's so worth it. And like I said, if I had gotten bad news, I was ready to analyze those with you and go through it again, because I was just like, I'm going to keep doing this till I pass, because I know this works. So I just recommend that people don't give up, because it's so worth it. It really is.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, our motto, our sort of reason for being in business is that we know that when people are studying for the bar, it feels like their life is on hold. And so we've taken as a theme to say, I have my life back. And I would love very much if you would be willing to just say that as loud as you want to say it, or as soft as you want to say it. But I'd like you to just affirm back into the universe that you have your life back. So you ready here?
I'm ready.
Breath. All right. 1, 2, 3.
I have my life back! Woo! And I do, and now I have all these chores and things I've been putting off, and like things in the backyard that need to get done, but boy, what a great thing to be able to do. That's
great. Well, we are super proud of you. We are just delighted for all the success that you had and all the successes we know you're going to have. And thank you so much for being so open and sharing your story. I know it will inspire lots and lots of folks. And I hope that you'll continue to stick around in our private Facebook group and be part of the community. I know that you've shared so much already with others, and I know as we go into this results season, we've got a lot of people we're rooting on together.
I know, I'm checking it every day. I'm excited for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. Well, again, best of luck to you. Good wishes. Congratulations to you and your entire family. And stay in touch with us. Let us know all the cool things that are happening. And thank you again for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for everything. I'm so grateful.
All right. Take care, everybody. We'll be with you next time. Bye-bye. Well, that's our episode for this week. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Abigail. It was really amazing, wasn't it? And I want to invite you again to join us this coming Thursday, 7 p.m. for a free special training webinar. It's called Do Something Different, Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. You can register right here on the show notes by clicking on the button or by going to celebrationbarreview.com/webinar, and we'll see you Thursday, 7 p.m. Well, that's it for this week. Thanks for being with us. Hope you have a great week. Good luck to those of you still waiting for results from February 2019. We'll keep you informed. We've got lots more great interviews on tap coming up, as well as just some discussions about bar exam in the news generally. There's obviously a lot to be said and being written and talked about with the bar exam and the scoring. And so we'll keep you up to date on all of that. Have a great week. We'll see you next week along the Extra Mile.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.